You're welcome.
Thank you, Heidi.
Okay, I think we're gonna get started. We have a nice group of people here now. So hello, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening in partnership with the Japanese American Citizens League. I'm delighted to welcome our guests, Maia and Alex Shibutani, in conversation with David Inoue. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You can click the link that we'll drop into the chat to get your own copy of Kudo Kids, The Mystery in Manhattan. The book purchase link includes both books in the Kudo Kids series. We also have signed book plates while supplies last. If you have a question for our guests, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want most answered. Now on to the event that you're waiting for. Maia and Alex Shibutani are two-time Olympic bronze medalists, three-time world medalists, 4 continents champions, and 2-time US national champions. At the 2018 Winter Olympics, they became the first ice dancers of Asian descent to medal at the Olympics and are the second sibling duo in the history of the sport to share an ice dancing medal. Off the ice, Maia and Alex are known for sharing their personalities, experiences, and interests on social media to bring new audiences to their sport. They travel the world and enjoy spending time together most of the time, eating food all of the time, and meeting new people anytime. In conversation with Maia and Alex is David Inoue, the executive director of the Japanese American Citizens League, the largest and oldest Asian American civil rights organization in the US. David's previous experiences include leadership roles in the nonprofit world, including grassroots work and government relations. He lives in the DC area with his wife and 2 sons. And now it is my pleasure to turn the event over to them.
Actually, it's a daughter and a son. So I
Thank
have
you.
a daughter named Mika, the same as in the Kudo Kids. But thank you, Heidi, for that introduction. And thank you, of course, to Politics and Prose for hosting us tonight for this event. So Alex and Maia, I think the last time I saw you in person was at the US-Japan Council event back in, I think it was November of 2019, before a lot of things happened. Obviously, Maia, you went through your health scare, and then COVID just kind of took over everything. So what have you guys been up to? And obviously released a book in that time, and how have things been going?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the really wonderful introduction from Heidi, but she did fail to mention that we are also newly community engagement interns for Politics and Prose as well. So we're very excited to be in our new roles, and we're really hoping that we can assist with all of the work that can possibly be done. But seriously, we've been focused on Kudo Kids, which is our book series that we're all here for. It's been an exciting period of time, especially the past few weeks, because book 2 came out at the beginning of May. And so we've been promoting and getting feedback from fans and young readers. So it's been really fun.
Well, maybe we could maybe just start out by maybe talking a little bit about the book, without giving anything away, of course. So what is the new book about? How's it different from the first book?
Sure. So no spoilers. I think that we can kind of introduce the series.
Right. Thanos has all of the Infinity Stones.
Yeah.
And,
spoiler.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
Oh, sorry.
Gosh. But I guess to kind of share the process of when we started working on this book, it was the fall of 2018. So we've been so excited that since our first book came out in September of last year, that we've finally been able to see photos and hear comments from young readers and families reading this story about Mika and Andy Kudo in book 1, Kudo Kids, The Mystery of the Masked Medalists. They're in Japan for the Summer Olympics. And so that adventure definitely pulls from some of our background, while these 2 characters solve a very exciting mystery. But then the book that you asked about is book 2, Kudo Kids, The Mystery in Manhattan. And so our characters get to go to one of our favorite cities in the world, which is New York City. And they get to experience a lot of amazing things. They go to all the tourist spots, there's magic, but then there's also a mystery involved too.
Yeah, and book 1 was, I think, obviously the start of the series. And so it was challenging from the standpoint that we were creating these characters and establishing their personalities. And so it was really helpful for us to be able to write from a place of experience and knowledge. We haven't competed at the Summer Olympic Games before, but being able to sort of utilize our sports background while also sharing our love of Tokyo, a city that we've been able to travel to and compete in many, many times over the course of our lives. And so that was really nice. And Maia's like, New York City is one of our favorite cities in the world. What she means is she's a New Yorker.
I was born there. I was born there.
New York. Yeah, she was born in New York. So we grew up on the East Coast. And so we were also able to kind of think about all the things that we love about the city and kind of share that experience. So Mika and Andy as first-time visitors to New York City. And also in book one, they're going to Japan for the first time also. So
and I feel like especially during the pandemic when we all haven't really been able to travel, what's been unique is to hear from readers that they feel like they're actually getting to visit the cities through our books. So that's been special.
Because hopefully books are an opportunity for readers of any age. We've been saying like Kudo Kids is a book series for kids of all ages. You know, you've got kids who are 8 years old and kids who are 45, and that's totally okay. And we definitely wanted to write it from a perspective of making sure that it was entertaining for
everyone,
for families. Yeah. So that's been nice to get the feedback that people have felt like they've been able to explore a new place. In the case of book one, explore a new culture and get to spend time with these awesome siblings.
Yeah, no, you're close. I'm 49 years old, so close to 45 years old as far as the readers.
I'm guessing, David.
I was like just how many jelly beans are in the jar.
Yeah, 45 was just a random number.
So
you don't look a day over 32, if I do say so.
Nice, nice. So you actually wrote this book during the COVID pandemic, or during part of it, or?
Yeah, book two was sort of one of our pandemic projects. Obviously, we're still technically in the pandemic, but it was nice to be able to focus in and sort of have I don't know if distraction is the right word, but definitely the inspiration to continue on with the story of the Kudo family and Mika and Andy's experience and adventure.
It was a great way for us to figure out how to Zoom because we were working together over Zoom quite a bit.
Right. Yeah. So we were actually, if we're talking about writing process, Maya and I were not staying in the same place during the pandemic. And so it was a lot of screen time.
But it was worth it, right? And especially after book one came out, to see all the pictures of kids reading the book, it was like, okay, so we have an audience in mind, even more so writing this time around for book two.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was actually curious because at one point on the subway, the mother pulls out some hand sanitizer. And I was wondering, is that because maybe your mother always brings hand sanitizer, or is that something that was added because everyone carries hand sanitizer now?
Sure. I mean, I think in our experience traveling, we always carry hand sanitizer, and we are really looking for that Purell endorsement deal. So we figured any plug that we could give would make sense for us. But no, realistically, it was a decision that we had to, make when it came to, is this Kudo Kids world going to be impacted by the global pandemic? And because it was still very early on and we were trying to figure out how to break the story, we decided that, fortunately for book one, at that point, we knew that the Olympics weren't going to be canceled, that they were only being postponed. And so we felt that it would be easier, given our lack of understanding for really where we were headed at that time, for us to be able to keep it in a non-pandemic situation.
We hope that these are stories that kids can be reading for a very long time. And then also with these books, for it to be kind of an escape from what the world currently is, while also enforcing kind of good safety habits of hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
No, because obviously we live here on the East Coast in DC, which is not too far from New York. And we used to go to New York every couple of years or so on a trip. And obviously with the pandemic, we have not been able to go last year where we might have otherwise gone, but definitely looking forward to it. But no, this book definitely does provide a lot of those experiences that you would otherwise have, and really weaves them into that story, which is really, really amazing how you do that. A lot of the imagery and everything like that. Obviously, you focus a lot on the sibling relationships between Mika and with Andy. Could you talk about how these characters have grown basically between particularly in the relationship between the first book and the second book?
Well, book one took place during the summer, and book two takes place during the course of spring break. So if we're just sort of like ballparking, at the age that they are, maybe a quarter inch, quite literally, in height. Maybe Mika got a new pair of shoes that has a little bit more of a lift to them. But realistically, I think that like any experience, because they were working as a team in book one, and we won't spoil because things could have gone well or very poorly for Mika and Andy, the Kudo Kids in book one.
Yes,
but
you have to read it and find out.
Regardless of the outcome of that experience, I think one of the things that Maia and I have experienced with our friendship and sibling relationship is we learn from every experience, good and bad. And so Mika and Andy, because there is yet another mystery to solve, an adventure that they're on in book two, they are able to sort of refer back to some of the challenges that they were either able to overcome or fail miserably at trying to overcome in book one. And I think there's definitely personal growth, particularly with Mika, I think, in book two.
Mm-hmm. And something that was really important to us in developing their dynamic was to make sure that, similar to us, that they learned how to communicate. And while Alex and I get along really well now, and that's parlayed into the process of writing.
Really, we still don't know how to communicate. So it was more of like a hope that through these fictional characters, they could communicate for us.
Sure, but I feel like that's kind of worked well for us working on these books together. But I think that all sibling dynamics have their good and bad moments, so we wanted to be realistic in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that people have often asked whether we, it's natural. People see us on the ice and off the ice, and I think we've become sort of poster children for like the ideal sibling relationship dynamic.
Not our words. That's what people tell us.
Parents and kids kind of like, they're like, oh, my mom and dad say that we should be more like you guys. And like, it's kind of like an eye roll. And the reality is that as well as we work together, we do have, our disagreements, and there's always sort of miscommunication that works out. And in our experience growing up, going on family vacations and spending time together, people, even though they're related, are different people and have different interests. And so Mika and Andy explore some of those experiences in book two.
No, that definitely comes through in the second book, and particularly around those diverging interests and how that impacts the relationship as well. I think when you talk about the growth, for me, what was really interesting is my own daughter, Mika, is actually now in her first year of middle school, which is about the same age as the Mika in this book, and kind of seeing some of that growing independence and some of the experience that she's going through really is accurate, actually, as far as what I see in my own daughter now. So it was fun to see that in reading.
Because for us, like, when we were talking about, developing the story, middle school felt like years ago. So we really had to go back and recall sort of what that experience was like.
But we keep each other accountable to the memories and all that stuff.
Right. I tend to sort of remember things with more of a inaccurate, fond recollection.
How much of it is based on your own childhood experiences versus, and you had very sort of different experiences, particularly as how you got into skating too. And Maia, you really just got into it when you were really young. And then Alex, I think you got a lot more serious about it basically once you got into middle school and realized, I think it was something having to do with doing a team sport or something, if I remember from one of the interviews I saw of you. And that's really when you got really serious about, and you were pretty serious before that. You have to be pretty serious to be competing like you were, but really focused on particularly the ice dancing and everything. So, and to what degree did you have sort of like that normal childhood that obviously you're trying to portray in Andy and Mika? But at the same time, the other part I'd like to explore about that is, having started a little bit later, but Maia on the other side, having started very young, how did that parlay into sort of like, everyone assumes that when you become an Olympic medalist that you start at the age of like 2 years old or even younger to do that, but clearly you don't necessarily have to do that. It's possible to really get into it a little bit later. And I think for me as a parent, that has a lot of implications when I'm trying to program my kids as far as, okay, Saturday at 10 a.m. you're doing this, at 12 a.m. or 12 noon you're doing this, at 3 p.m. you're doing this.
You software update at 5 p.m.
Exactly.
And we boot you up for Tuesday morning.
What is the phone? What is the phone calendar saying we have to be at? So, talk a little bit about what your childhoods were like, and how does that relate to what you're trying to portray in these books as well.
I think the one thing that we clearly have a unique childhood experience, and even our more. I'm not an adult yet.
We said kids from age.
Yes, even my later stage kid experience right now is unique. But with Mika and Andy, we didn't want a necessarily normal, childhood experience, because I don't know if there is such a thing as like a normal childhood experience. For starters, with Mika and Andy, they are unique characters from the standpoint that they are siblings, but they're also Japanese Americans. And so, in natural ways, we wanted to kind of incorporate that into who they are as people, because it does sort of reflect in our minds some of the decisions that they make and their mannerisms and the way that they sort of interact with the world. But with us and our background in terms of getting into skating, as much as it seems like we really focused in on skating right away, or for Maia at a young age, and then me still at a fairly young age, we've always remained very open-minded to new experiences and trying new things. And that's something that we've recognized over the years has been incredibly important to our development in skating. And so with Mika and Andy, they have a bunch of different interests. And the reality for us when we were kids, we had a bunch of different interests as well.
Mm-hmm. And so for more background for the audience, I started skating when I was 4. Alex, we have a 3-year age difference. He was 7 years old, and then we started.
Physical age difference.
Yeah. We started skating together at the ages of 9 and 12. And so it's interesting because I haven't really thought about you being older, starting later at the age of 12, but I guess it's true.
Right.
And so I think that just in our case, what we found is that we were able to commit ourselves and eventually become successful because we both were just passionate about what we were doing and we were excited and having fun.
Yeah, and I think that you go through various stages of commitment. It would be ridiculous for me to say that at the age of 12, I was as committed as I was in preparation for the 2018 Olympics. It was definitely something that, like Maia said, was rooted in a sense of enjoyment and fun, and I was really, it was exciting to be learning new things constantly. And really, like as an adult, even, I'll just say it, I'm an adult, you're always learning new things. But at that particular age, it was especially fun because we were seeing rapid improvement and growth on a daily basis. But as you get older, the growth and the acceleration of progression is not necessarily always linear. It's not always going to be quick and easy, and things are definitely going to be challenging. So I think that through our experiences, we've definitely learned a lot of lessons along the way. But
I feel like we were only able to write this book together, this series, because we had so many interests when we were kids. If we were just focused on skating all the time, I don't think that would naturally kind of take us into this different route.
And to not sound sort of lame about saying, oh yeah, we had tons of interests. And it's like, yeah, right, you guys just skated all the time and went to the Olympics. I was a huge basketball fan when I was a kid. And I love to watch basketball. I remember getting New York Times in the morning and just like going through the box scores. And I knew more about
You knew so much.
I was a professional fantasy sports player at the age of 13, more so than I was a competitive figure skater. I was more into that than school, admittedly. And I mean, I think that fortunately revealed itself to be a very beneficial use of my time for the writing of book 2, because there's a bit of a basketball element in book 2, and clearly in book 1 there's a sports element. And so it's, as much as we're passionate about figure skating and the Winter Olympics, we have an appreciation and respect for all sports and all art forms too, because figure skating is one of those sports that combines the athleticism and technicality with storytelling and artistry.
And another thing that's one of our interests that made its way into the book is the love of photography that Mika has, and that's something that Alex and I both really enjoy and care about.
Book 2 also, when you think about New York, we're trying to think, we have the Olympics as a set piece for the plot of book 1, and that kind of naturally gives way to certain experiences and story notes. But with book 2, when you think about New York City, it's just like, well, are they going to, be investigating a missing pretzel stand? It's like, no, like maybe there are other things in New York that we can think about. Like,
darn, we could have done that.
I know, missed opportunity. but like, Broadway and fashion. And so as we've grown up, our experiences in the city have kind of shown us truly the wealth of things that New York has to offer.
New York is like its own character.
Yeah. And so, with figure skating, we have experience being involved in the design process of costumes. We've worked with costume designers based in New York City. We've been to Broadway shows and referenced and collaborated with artists who perform on Broadway and in ballet. And so it was very much like continuing to write from our interests and what we know a little bit about.
Yeah. So obviously you guys are in LA now. Is it a spoiler if we give away whether you're Southern Cal or UCLA?
Oh, right. Well,
I think that's pretty clear from the book.
It was more of well, it's interesting actually, because when we were following the NCAA tournament, sort of there's a reveal. Andy is very excited to be going to New York City because the NCAA tournament, March Madness, is occurring. And Mika and Andy's parents, their father is a travel reporter, and he's very passionate about food, which we are also very passionate about food. And their mom, Karen Kudo,
is a sports editor.
Yeah, and so given my expertise in the area of sports journalism, but then also just knowing some sports journalists over the years, we thought that was a great way for them to be in Tokyo for the Olympics, and that factors into book one. But then in book two, a great opportunity to include a new sport, because Mika loves her photography, but Andy's actually getting into basketball. And it was interesting sort of following along the tournament and tracking the progress of the bracket and seeing that actually, even though this was like a year and a half ago, we had done
the predictions were pretty good.
Yeah, like we did a pretty good job of like our one total miss was Duke, who didn't make the tournament at all this year, which like, come on, Duke always makes the tournament. Yeah. The one year they don't, it was a little bit of a head scratcher, but USC, as you kind of mentioned, did make the tournament. We just didn't foresee UCLA doing better in the tournament than USC.
And by mean you, because he was the one who picked that.
Yes.
I was gonna say, so you're not gonna reveal if whether you're USC or UCLA.
We love both equally.
Don't want to alienate your fan base, right?
We have no educational tie to either institution. So.
Now you've mentioned food, and obviously you talk about how you love food, and that's a big part of both these books. I'm set in Tokyo, New York. I'm food capitals of the world. What are some of your favorite things to eat? And one of the great things I loved about the first book was talking about all the Japanese foods, because oftentimes, for kids particularly, you had that lunchbox experience of where you bring your food to school and then somebody makes fun of it basically. But the exposure that you gave to all sorts of different things, natto, for example. But what are some of your favorites? I mean, are they the things that you mentioned in the books? Are there things that you wish that you could have also worked into it, or maybe is that in a book to come?
Something that's been important to us with these stories is to have Mika and Andy being really open-minded and adventurous when it comes to new food, because I think that that's the approach that we've tried to take. And so,
also not being too experienced too, because being able to use them as an example for that open-mindedness to new things, new cultures, even things from their own culture was important to us to demonstrate.
And so when you were mentioning food and favorite things that we included, I quickly grabbed our first book, and you'll see this illustration right there is Mika and Andy checking out a takoyaki stand. And that's pretty much pulled from experience.
There's a takoyaki stand in Tokyo that Maia and I have been going to for a bunch of years. And so that is a representation of kind of that experience of enjoying takoyaki. And takoyaki, for anyone who's watching, it is sort of it consists of vegetables and octopus, and it's kind of deep fried in a batter. And so it's kind of like a round pancake, and it's super delicious because they put Japanese mayonnaise on it and a special sauce.
Are you hungry yet?
Yeah, no. It's one of those things that, like, if you are, born and raised in the United States, it's something that can be maybe a little intimidating for people who are less food adventurous, but it's super delicious. And we wanted to incorporate that as well as many other of our favorite Japanese foods, some more well-known to to most readers, like ramen, but also like tonkatsu, which is fried pork or chicken cutlet. And so trying to, as their dad is explaining these different foods, essentially to our young readers around the world and in the United States, making kind of comparisons so that young readers can kind of form a reference point for like, oh, okay, so like tonkatsu is sort of like fried chicken, like a chicken nugget, but instead of chicken, it is pork in this case. So that was definitely important. And one of the things we were talking about it earlier, David, your son is a huge fan of the Avengers. One of the things that we were thinking about in the Avengers, and there are some references actually, like we actually like Marvel movies too. And so in book 2, when they're in New York City, there might be a reference to sort of
a food mention,
a food moment
yes,
that fans of the Marvel movies might appreciate. But when you watch TV shows and movies, sometimes it's a mystery adventure and it's really exciting, but like they're not eating. It's like, when do they eat? Like you got to fuel up. And as a foodie, you really just want to know what some of your favorite characters like to eat. And so we want
So our readers definitely are on the food journey with Mika and Andy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you want to ask your question since they kind of just raised it?
But I asked them.
Oh, well, that was off camera. You want to ask him now?
Hey, 2.
Oh, okay. What's your favorite superhero?
Favorite superhero? That's so tough.
I feel like this is very Marvel specific, coming from a Marvel super fan like you.
And I feel like people have brackets for this stuff, right?
Right. So I had said previously that, I'm trying to pick should I pick the strongest superhero or the one that I think is like the most interesting?
You can name both.
Well, I was just saying, we already sort of had this conversation off the Zoom. I'm the Loki of our
the mischief maker.
Yeah. Well, Maia's, I think Thor can be.
It's the flow. It's the flow. That's why I'm
right.
Thor.
But you've never gone into sort of a Thor stage video games, drinking lots of beer.
Yeah, that's
stage
true.
like Thor.
But then my favorite superhero, I would say, was Iron Man, right?
Yeah, Maia's a big Iron Man fan.
What's your favorite superhero?
Iron Man.
Iron Man.
Awesome.
So as a parent, oftentimes when I'm looking at books, I look at them as a way to teach lessons to my children. How do you try and integrate sort of teaching about maybe morality and ethics into the books? Because it does. There's definitely some elements of that in there. And don't want to give anything away as to how you teach it or what you teach, but
Sure.
How important is that for you, being able to teach lessons to children and parents?
I think even before we became authors, we understood the responsibility that we had with our platform, being Olympic athletes representing Team USA, but having a fan base of all ages across the world, and sort of being good role models for families and siblings. And that's something that we take seriously, but I think we managed to have a good time to show, that as hard as we work and as kind of important or stressful the events that we compete in can be, we managed to center everything in this focus of fun and enjoyment and
More of a hopefully positive outlook.
Yeah. And so we didn't want to be too heavy-handed with any of the lessons that we might be sharing, but just, the concept of these books are, these 2 young kids are exploring a city. In some cases, both cases, a city they've never been before. So, general sort of safety things that we wanted to employ. You mentioned the hand sanitizer. It's good to make sure that we're staying healthy, especially now. Or are there any other things? I think honesty, friendship.
Communication, the importance of communication. And I think that one of the things that's been so special about this series is that they're family stories. So we realize the power of kids being able to read books by themselves, but then also excitedly talking about the books with their parents and having those conversations. So definitely making sure that within the plot, there are enough things that people can discuss and relate to each other with.
Sure, because also our personal experience, we read books at the same time, and oftentimes our mom and or our dad would be reading the book series or the book that we were reading with us. So it would be a topic of conversation at dinner. And as much as exciting as it would be to sort of follow the adventurous plot, there were always lessons that we could learn and that our parents would point out. And when we were kids driving around to different rinks, not us driving, but our mom driving us to different rinks, we were listening to audiobooks. And so Maya and I also recorded the audiobook version for both Kudo Kids 1 and Kudo Kids 2. And so trying to think about how we can kind of come up with a 360-degree entertaining story that, like you mentioned, has those good lessons.
Yeah. So you each did, I haven't listened to the audiobook, but I assume that Maya, you did Mika's voice and
No,
Alex,
I was Andy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course.
No, and that's one of the things that, for people who haven't picked up a copy of Kudo Kids yet, that we find really exciting is, there are definitely stories where, you have two siblings featured. And I think what's nice though is that, like, oftentimes siblings are pitted against each other. There's always like a sense of rivalry or antagonistic behavior between the siblings because they're either made to feel like they're competitors with each other or they're both going for the same thing, like only one can be the next king of Asgard type situation, right? And so I think it's great that they, reflect us in our experience in working together, but also as far as, what was I going to say? With the book, you get to learn and follow along the story through both of their perspectives. So the chapters alternate.
Yeah, no, I know. I actually did notice that too. It alternates between each of them. Yeah,
and I think that was incredibly important to us because our relationship has always been about equality. We talk about women's sports and men's sports. Maya and I are in a team sport where we both play an equally important, valuable role.
So having that balance being shown and being evident in the books was important to us. And then when it came to working on each chapter, I'd say that I maybe took more of the lead when it came to Mika's chapters, and the same thing for Alex with Andy. And then definitely when we were in the recording studio for book 1 and book 2, it was really fun to have the chance to perform what we'd written.
Yeah, and it's silly because for whatever reason, like I remember being a younger kid, and I was more drawn, my particular interest was like male characters, like male heroes. And now I think it's fantastic because the literary space is expanding and we're seeing more representation of different types of people, different types of characters. When Maya and I were kids, if we wanted to, I recall so many of my favorite series were about like animals. Animals were a way for people to talk about and make sort of metaphorical relationships to the world and how we exist and how, like, an otter can be best friends with a bear and, they can get along and have this allyship with Mika and Andy. I think that it's really great and exciting that you can have a young boy read and get to sort of spend time with both a young male and young female character.
Yeah. No, I think back to when I was even younger than my son was. I'm reading the Hardy Boys books was the thing, but once I got through those, I read the Nancy Drew books because they were formulaic and it really didn't matter. Even though I think when they were written, it was basically targeting Hardy Boys was meant for boys to read and Nancy Drew was meant for girls. And this was back long before I was even born when those books were written. But I think it is interesting how that has changed now, where we don't have these sort of like gender specific ideals that we have to conform to anymore, which is one of the great things.
I think important for us was like in this series, Mika, like Maya, is very intelligent and mature, and she's a leader and she's capable of making her own decisions, even though Andy is the older brother. And so I think kind of in a small way, maybe playing a role in addressing kind of some of the stereotypes that, have existed where it's like, oh, like you're a boy and you're older, like, more, or you should be the leader. I think Andy and Mika having that balanced relationship where she has an equal voice and he respects her, that's really important representation for kids and people to see.
And that reflects our own experience and dynamic.
One last thing I wanted to kind of cover, a much more serious note. Obviously, with COVID, what's been happening in the Asian American community with a lot of the anti-Asian violence. The two of you have been fantastic spokespeople and speaking out against it and really advocating for more inclusion. What would you say to some of perhaps our younger audience out there today who maybe is being victimized by bullying because of who they are, whether it be because they're Asian, because perhaps they're differently abled, or particularly this month, it's LGBTQ Pride Month. And we know that that's also oftentimes a source for bullying. But what would you say to them right now as a child, and what they can expect to perhaps for it to be better, or how they might cope with what's been happening?
I would start with saying that part of the reason why we've been outspoken on this issue, but then other issues, and we try to be informed and educated so that we can best support different marginalized groups or underrepresented groups, is because bullying and discrimination are completely unacceptable and shouldn't be tolerated. And fortunately, we're now, I think, in a time of greater awareness and support structures that are in place for people who are being victimized by bullies, if you're a kid, or by institutions and structures where people can have a voice, and there are people who will reach out and support, whether people from your own community or people who you might not necessarily expect to be a supporter of you.
And so I think important things for a younger person to realize is that you are not alone. It's important that you don't try and internalize things that you're going through. Find someone who you trust, who you can tell what's happening, and just realize that there's no shame in asking for help and support.
And there's no shame in being different. Even if you are made to feel like that, even if you are made to feel that because you are different, you are not equal to, or you are not as good as someone else. Oftentimes, in my experience, bullying and negative, speech has been a result of someone's insecurity or their inability to sort of see the world from, a different perspective other than their own. And that's unfortunate. And there are people out there who, are less accepting of others, and it's really sad. But I think that by and large, in Maia's and my experiences, there are far more people who are good out there and want to support you and see you thrive. And if we can focus on supporting our young people in the next generation and giving them sort of the assistance that they need and making them feel like they can be heard, then I think that, they're our future leaders. And so making sure that they understand that they have our full support as we move forward, because definitely it's been a tough time. We definitely acknowledge that. And it won't necessarily get easier anytime soon, but that's why representation is important. That's why being proud of who you are is important. And that's why realizing that what makes you different is what makes you unique, and that's a special power.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, what makes you different is what makes you unique. And if you kind of need a tool apart from just speaking to people who you can trust and ask for help, another thing that I've found helpful is to just write down your thoughts too, because sometimes it can be a lot, but writing things down can help you process.
And we can stand to learn a lot from history too. I think that, for example, with the Asian American community, Maia and I, our parents are amazing, and they definitely introduced us to books and literature when we were kids growing up, where we could, even though there was a limited amount of subject material that we could be exposed to, that could show us the representation and see other people who, maybe didn't have our exact experience, but who looked like us. That was important, and we definitely benefited from that. But there are now more and more options. Kudo Kids is a contemporary series featuring 2 Japanese American, Asian American kids. And their ethnicity, their race is not the core of the series. They are 2 kids that anyone can relate to because they love a bunch of different things. They get along, they solve problems. And so there are more options out there, and it'll only continue to get better. And so being aware of history, though, and seeing that maybe it feels like you're alone, maybe it feels like you're the first one, but maybe it's not in like the same exact thing. Like for us, there may have not been, it was mentioned at the beginning of the Zoom during the introduction that we were the first Asian American ice dancers to medal at the Olympics. So sure, there may have not been an Olympic ice dance team of Asian descent that we could look to for guidance and see their success and be inspired. But certainly there were other firsts in different categories. And because Maya and I have varied interests, you're able to be inspired by other Asian Americans, other Japanese Americans, and other people at large. I was inspired by Michael Jordan and chose to stick my tongue out whenever I would shoot layups because Michael Jordan stuck his tongue out all the time. Just being open-minded and a good citizen of the world that we live in.
And learning about your history is also how you can connect more with your community too.
Yeah, and be proud of where you come from.
That's where JCL really tries to focus on understanding that history, the experience of Japanese Americans in this country in particular. I do really want to just tip my hat to you all, just because of you've used your platform in that way, and to be being Olympic athletes, but then to also represent as Asian Americans and making that a big part of who you are. I think also these books are, like you said, they happen to be Japanese American, but that doesn't necessarily define them. And why that's so important is you're reaching audiences perhaps that are not necessarily Japanese American, that oftentimes in the Asian American community, we kind of talk amongst ourselves or whatever, but it's not necessarily how do we reach non-Asian Americans, particularly around this issue of anti-Asian hate, that it is sort of like, how do we create that normalization of seeing Japanese Americans, Asian Americans in ways that they might not normally expect to, such as an Olympic athlete, such as an author, such as the main characters of a book of kids who are just going to New York City or going to Tokyo. So I think that's what's so important about sort of combating a lot of these stereotypes, is to have all these different ways of presenting our Asian American community as really being a part of American culture and American history and everything. And actually that's where I also want to thank Politics and Prose for hosting us. And I really want to give Politics and Prose great kudos because they have a fantastic selection of Asian American authors.
I see what you did there, David. Working kudos, appreciate it.
So yes, the little what is it, a homonym, or I guess, but no, they have a fantastic selection of Asian American authors that when I take my kids there, there's selections of books that did not exist when I was growing up. And I think it's great that, and your publisher as well, that there are these opportunities to get these stories out there, whether they are Asian American specific or perhaps not even, like your book is. Yeah, with that I think close out our kind of main section and want to open it up for any questions from the audience. Right now, we have one question right now about how much time are you devoting to skating now?
We were on the ice yesterday, actually.
Yeah. Spoiler.
Yeah, for quite a bit of time. So yeah, we've been focused on the Kudo Kids book series, and we actually are in the midst of developing some other fun projects.
That we can't talk about too much yet.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what you were talking about, David, as far as sort of using your platform and having an understanding and awareness of where you can provide value. And I think that in thinking about the type of genre for storytelling that we wanted to step into, I think the traditional or more expected pathway for athletes, maybe Olympians, into the literary world is sort of this is my story, this is my autobiography, or this is, my dream when I was a kid to go to the Olympics or to become a most valuable player in the National Basketball Association. For us, we thought that creating two new characters, as opposed to talking about our own sort of accomplishments or our own story, that's already documented. And with social media now in this generation that we live in, we're able to continue to share and exist in the world and represent Asian Americans and represent siblings and families. But by creating two new characters,
we're able to add to representation.
Yeah, that's another Asian American sibling duo that kids can look up to. And I mean, if we think about sort of the formative experiences of our youth, the books that we read and movies and TV shows that we watch, those are the things and the lessons and experiences that we recall. And I mean, this year has been a lot about reflection. Maya and I have been spending we always spend a lot of time together, but we've been spending more time together with our parents, and you reminisce and you think about things. And especially with the accomplishment of these 2 books being released into the world, we've been asked a lot about the books that we read when we were kids, and they stay with you. The movies that you watch when you're a kid, and the lessons that you take away from them are extremely impactful with how you see the world and interact with people.
And I think that we have a lot of gratitude just because our parents did introduce us to reading. They both love reading and they shared that with us. And so for us to be able to have these 2 books, like Alex said, out in the world is so special.
And so back to kind of the skating questions, like we have a really good thing going with sort of people knowing us as skaters, but we think that there's more that we can do to continue to follow our passions and our interest in storytelling, while also continuing to bring joy and entertain people, off the ice as well as on the ice.
Okay. So I have a question from Joyce. How did you come up with the characters' names?
That's a great question. People ask us that frequently. So it is not, it's no coincidence that Mika starts with an M and is 4 letters, and Andy starts with an A and is 4 letters. So we were just tossing around some names back and forth, and those 2 just kind of worked well together, in our opinion.
And then as far as Kudo Kids, people know us as the Shib Sibs. And originally, like in the very early stages of the creative process, we're like, do we want to create maybe a fictionalized version of us? Like, Maia and Alex, if they hadn't gone into skating, because, we wanted the series to explore more than just the skating world. And actually, spoiler, there is a little bit of a skating moment in book 2, in one of our favorite places to skate in the world, but in New York City in particular. And so, yeah, I think Kudo Kids was a way for it to be like, it's already kind of a bit of a zag that Maia and Alex aren't doing an autobiography. So what is this whole thing? And so we figured like Kudo Kids, Kudo being a Japanese surname, it's like Kudo Kids by the Shib Sibs by Maia and Alex Shibutani. That makes sense. And, as far as Japanese names that non-Japanese people are used to, Kudo, and you mentioned it earlier, kudos, like it was something that we knew people would be able to pronounce, and kind of, it has a nice ring to it. So we liked it for that reason.
Yeah, no, I think that's always a challenge, particularly with Japanese names, with the pronunciation. When we were naming our kids, Mika was definitely one that's what we knew that people could pronounce. And for Akira, actually, it was because we knew that there was a manga that most people have read, Akira Kurosawa, that we figured, okay, that's reasonable that most people will probably be able to pronounce that. So a lot of thought did go into that. Now, when you were young, do you feel like you faced any challenges because of your Japanese heritage, and how did you overcome it? There's a question from Naho Abe.
Thank you, Naho, for your question. Yes. I'm still very young, and I think it's a continual challenge, and something that Unfortunately, I think the incidents over the course of the past year that have been facing the Asian American community have given us time to reflect on our life experiences and how we've processed different moments and actions and things that have been both done to us and said to us over the course of our time in sport, but also off the ice in social situations. Being Asian American, I think it's been said, it's like, you're constantly, it's a process, right? We're constantly learning more about ourselves and our community, and no one's coming from the exact same place. We are not a monolith. There are so many different experiences and cultures and generations involved. So yeah, it's definitely been something that's factored into our lives, but fortunately we've always had each other to deal with these challenges. In a sport where there is not a lot of diversity, ice dance is not known for a very representative of the world look. If you look at the roster of an ice dance competition,
or even just the history of the sport,
a lot of Russians, right?
Well, it's just very Caucasian and European, and only recently has there been more North American success. But like Maia and I are the first Asian American, or Asian ice dance team of Asian descent for a reason. And you look back at the podium at the Olympic Games, every Olympic Games since the sport's inclusion in the Winter Olympic Games, and it's very European, very Caucasian.
And I think that a lot of people focus on the stat where it's first ones to medal, but it's like top 10. It goes pretty deep. It's not just about the podium.
Yeah, and I think that, interestingly, in some ways, like there has been a ton of success, especially in the recent modern era of figure skating as a whole, in the single skating disciplines, with fantastic skaters coming from Japan, starting with like Midori Ito. Like, I mean, 1992 Albertville was Kristi Yamaguchi winning the Olympic gold medal and Midori Ito coming in second. And that was a groundbreaking accomplishment for the time. And since then, there have been many single skaters and pair skaters from China who have done exceptionally well. South Korea, Yuna Kim, like with the international scene. And so I think it's interesting. It's like, we don't have enough time for it today, but you know, as a whole, I think the skating community tends to think like, oh, Asians are well represented in our sport, but certainly not in ice dance, and definitely not in, you know, the results and the placements until we came along. And so inevitably, in reflecting and in the moment, you realize that there are certain hurdles that you have to get over when there hasn't been a track record for diversity and representation.
Yeah. So I have a question from my other child here, who is perhaps not as willing to go on camera as my son, but she's wondering what other cities or countries are you thinking of going to for the book?
Oh, for the book.
That's a great question.
Thank you, Mika, for the question. Does Mika know that there's a Mika and Kudo Kids too?
She does. I think I sent you a picture of her reading the book once we got a copy. So yeah, she sat down with it right away.
Well, to start with, I guess we're interested in hearing where Mika thinks Mika should go in the next Kudo Kids book. Does she have any recommendations or suggestions?
Any recommendations? She has a deer in the headlights look on her right now.
She can tell us later.
So you're prepared to ask questions, but you're not prepared.
Exactly.
To see how it is.
She's willing to send me the questions from off camera. But
yeah, no, totally. That's okay. I think that, you know, in starting off with Tokyo and New York, like we mentioned, we were writing about places that we were very familiar with. And we've had the great fortune of being able to travel and compete in a bunch of different countries around the world. So maybe they're in Europe, maybe they're in Paris, maybe they go to Barcelona in Spain, or another American city. The Kudo Kids are born and raised in the Los Angeles, California area. And you know, as we've spent more time here, we've become more familiar with the rich tradition, history of Japanese Americans in the surrounding LA areas. So maybe they'll stay at home. They just went on 2 trips, you know, summer vacation for the Olympics in Tokyo, and then spring break in New York City.
Maybe it's time to be at home.
Yeah, get some takoyaki there in Little Tokyo, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it's time to see what things are like during a regular sort of school week for Mika and Andy. Who knows?
I think we have one more question from Todd here. Do we have time for that, Heidi? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So last question here is, what do you appreciate most about how your parents raised you? And this is another question from Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thanks, Todd.
That's a hard
thanks
question.
for the really difficult question.
Now, are your parents watching?
It might be, or they will watch later. We've talked about it before.
Yeah, I mean, they're so unconditionally supportive of us, which we appreciate, but I think
I really appreciate it. Believe me, I definitely benefited from unconditional support.
But I feel like one of the best things that they kind of taught us was how to be each other's greatest supporters, because to encourage us with our age difference to understand the fact that even if we weren't skating together, that we're still family and how important that is. They did a fantastic job making sure that we have this strong bond that we can really trust and believe in.
Yeah, I would say that the best thing that they've given me individually was Maia. Seriously, like I'm an Olympic medalist because of Maia. And beyond that, in more serious tone, sort of the experiences that we've shared and like the life moments that we've been through, good and bad, you know, the victories, the challenges. It's been tremendous and unique, I think, for us to grow up together in the way that we have. And we know that we've always got each other's back. And we've been able to accomplish a lot, and it's been because of their support and the way that they raised us. So, you know, they've taught us so many important lessons, and we've continued to grow. But we're a very tight-knit family, and yeah, super special. Like they were able to come to the Olympic Games to watch us compete, and that's incredibly special to reflect on. You know, where the journey began, and where we are now, and where we're going. So. Definitely grateful for every moment.
Thank you so much. I will put in my last plugs for people to get both books if you haven't already. Also, we'll be
Can we get your best, book presenting? Can you present the books for us? Kind of give
Some
us
hand
a nice
movements.
gesture, like like a little shake, a little
Vanna White, perhaps. And then we'll be seeing you at our JCL convention in a little bit over a month. For anyone who wants to learn about JCL, our website is jacl.org. And Heidi, I will hand things back over to you.
All right. Thank you all so much. It was so enjoyable listening to you talk about your books and your life and your interests and sharing your relationship. You all I know you say you don't always get along, but I can't tell that at all. I really enjoyed
As the Zoom camera goes off, we're
like
fighting.
inching
poking at her. Yeah. So thank you. We're really excited about seeing where else Mika and Andy go. I'm very excited to see what's next. And we're also really excited to see you two on the ice. So that's very exciting for us all to think about as well. And we will definitely hit you up for being spokespeople for Politics and Prose. So don't worry about us.
I wanted you to remember that, Heidi.
It's in here. It's in here, Alex.
The contract now, remember, we signed it. So
Thank you.
Now we're going to the store in person at some point soon, hopefully.
Anytime. We would love to have you. Yeah, we would love to have you there. We can meet David there and Akita. So thank you all. And thanks to our audience for being here. Thanks for the great questions. David, thank you for your moderating. We appreciate it. And Akita, thank you for being here as well. So just one more reminder, you can click the link in the chat box to buy the books, and don't be strangers to the store, and keep reading, everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us tonight.